Hello, everybody, and welcome back from our meet and greet. Thank you for participating in that. And for those of you who'd like to join in the future, if you log into our spiritual salon during the meet and greet section, you can say hi to everybody in the Zoom room and to those of us in the room as an opportunity to connect. So today we have a special guest and a special gift. It is a friend of mine from seminary who I'll introduce in a moment. But first I want to introduce the talk, which she's going to give, called A Walk in My Shoes, an invitation with a song that she requested that Misa sing. And so without further ado, I'm going to give you Misa singing Lift Every Voice.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as listening skies. Let it resound loud as a rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our Father sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughter.
All right.
Out from a gloomy path till now we stand at last, where the red gleam of a bright star is cast.
Miss Misa Malone. That is an amazing song. And Misa sung it first twice now, and I got the pleasure of being here in the room when she sang it live, and she sang it when we did our Juneteenth service this year as well. And Jackie and I talked about this in seminary when we were both there together. So our guest speaker today is Reverend Jackie Hawkins. She and I went to Unity Seminary together for 3 years. We crossed paths there. She was there a little longer than I. She took her time, and I was in a hurry, which is typical of both of us. And so, as you'll see here in a minute, where we are the tortoise and the hare, and we balance each other pretty spectacularly. I found it my job all the time in school to torture her, and we decided that really we were siblings separated at birth, and I was her little brother here to torture her. She first introduced me to the term PK, and I had never heard the term PK before. She said, "I'm a PK," and I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "I'm a preacher's kid." She grew up as a child in a household where her father was a Baptist minister. And in the journey of her life, she also sat in the church and listened to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As she grew up in Texas, she then moved to Michigan, where she went to high school, and then settled in a career and a life in New York State, in Albany, in New York State government, where she rose to very high levels in HR and in diversity and inclusion programs in the New York State government. After retiring from that, she started her journey into ministry, and that's where our paths crossed. It is my pleasure, my honor, and my privilege to introduce to you Reverend Jackie Hawkins to give us our talk today. Hi, Jackie.
I can.
It
Thank
is-
you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Misa, for that, oh my goodness, beautiful rendition of Lift Every Voice and Sing. Powerful. So I'd like to begin this morning by saying, we cannot ignore the racial tensions that are persistent in our country. And we must not dismiss even the subtle discomforts that all of us feel. Whether we're ministers or congregants or visitors today, we all feel the subtle discomforts at some time around racial issues. So if we are to heal our racial divisions, we must acknowledge that they exist. We must admit that we have wounds. We must admit that those wounds do need healing. Now, I know that we in our humanness oftentimes don't want to talk about those things that are difficult. We don't want to admit to those things that are challenging, especially around race. But we must, if we are to heal as a nation. So the first step, of course, in beginning our healing journey is to have a conversation. We must have a conversation around race. But I know we like to sweep things under the rug, but we can no longer afford to do that. So let's pull back the rug and begin to have a conversation on race. I don't know what it's like to walk in your shoes. And you don't know what it's like to walk in mine, I submit. So this morning, I invite you to walk in my shoes so that we can begin a conversation on race. And I'd like to begin by using some metaphors around my walk. So metaphorically speaking, my walk began on stony road, often without the benefit of shoes and socks. And this walk began in the hot tar surface side roads of Texas, where the heat blistered my feet. The heat of racism blistered my feet. As an African American growing up in Texas in the 50s and 60s, as Ken indicated, I'm a PK, a preacher's kid. It was challenging. And I had this experience of a weird combination, since I was a preacher's kid, of overprotection on the one hand and painful disregard on the other. Because, you know, Texas was very inhospitable to African Americans. And my family was always on high alert. We were always in a state of anxiety, not because we were doing anything wrong, unless you view working to dismantle discrimination, laws and policies and practices wrong. You see, my father was very active in the civil rights movement. And yes, he knew Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King was also a Baptist minister working in the civil rights movement. So my father was working in Texas in the civil rights movement, and he and my brother would get into good trouble, as the late Congressman John Lewis would say. They would get into good trouble. Because, you see, at that time, we were not able to even go to the movies. We could not eat in restaurants. We could not even get a hotel room when we were traveling on the short vacations that we did when we could afford it. So my brother and my father got into good trouble. And they marched, and they protested, and they sat in the segregated lunch counters at stores like Woolworth's, Five and Dime, in order to right the wrongs of racism. As Black folks living at that time, we were living subjugated to white folks. And we were supposed to live that way according to white folks. And this was a belief embedded in that system that went as far back as 1619, when my ancestors were brought over on ships from Africa. And they were viewed as people who were not really people. They were viewed as subhuman. They were viewed as property that could be bought and sold and used as collateral. They were even used as gifts. And they were also bludgeoned and beaten and even killed if they had the audacity to try to run away. Then just after my 16th birthday, my father moved us to Michigan in the dead of winter. I was so heartbroken. I cried. And I was afraid to leave Texas, even as bad as it was, to go to a place that I didn't know anything about. It was cold, and racism existed in Michigan as well. So I went from experiencing the blistering hot racism of Texas to the icy cold, subtle racism of Michigan, trading one racial induced trauma for another. And so throughout this part of my walk, I cried and I voiced my discomfort, and no one seemed to hear me. It was during this time while in high school that I developed chronic stomach problems that did not heal until many, many years later. So frankly, my walk has been filled with almost constant fear and anxiety. Yet, as the Negro National Anthem says, it was also a walk of faith and hope. And so as a descendant of enslaved people, I also inherited their second-class status. But I also inherited their strength, their spiritual strength, their faith, their hope, especially being expressed during times of difficulty, times of struggle. Yes, my shoes are black. My shoes are African American. I cannot change these shoes. And even though there have been times, especially in the Michigan move, that my shoes felt odd and ill-fitting, when I was thrust into an all-white world, I pushed through. I pushed through that discomfort. I accepted my shoes as permanent. I embraced my shoes. My shoes, also known as, of course, my skin, my race, my heritage. That these shoes were often viewed as not good enough, less than. Again, still embedded beliefs from way back when. I resisted the urge to bleach my skin, as my classmates back in Texas had done. I embraced my skin, but my classmates internalized the oppression. They adopted the belief that Black was not beautiful, that they were ugly somehow. And they thought that by bleaching their skin, they could get closer to being white. And then perhaps even be able to pass for white. This is my walk. This has been my walk. And this walk has meant enduring a relentless assault on my psyche to accept a false narrative that I and others like me were less than perfect expressions of God. It has meant me living in a state of perpetual fear, both consciously and subconsciously. Fear that I or one of my family members would be harmed or even killed. And as the mother of an African American son, my fear for him has existed throughout his life. And I will tell you that this fear is sharpened every time I see on television or read about or hear about an African American male being killed by the police. And even hearing incendiary words coming from the president. That is a real fear. My walk has also meant expecting less, even when dreaming big. And even though I have certainly enjoyed a good education, wonderful experiences, those accomplishments, oftentimes, even though I was overjoyed, it was a combination of being overjoyed and waiting for the catch. Waiting for the catch. But I have certainly embraced the many opportunities that I have had. As Ken indicated, rising to the highest levels of my profession in New York State government as Deputy Controller for Human Resources and Administration. But I remember one time when I was promoted to Assistant Controller for Human Resources and Affirmative Action, that the New York Post ran this false story about me and emblazoned on the front page was the controller's office hires a quota queen. My walk has been interesting. However, I have been thrilled to be able to dismantle racism, sex-based discrimination, disability discrimination in the workplace in New York State. I am proud of that. I am proud of being able to co-write a report that changed the laws governing sexual harassment and assault in New York State. I am proud of that. The shoes that I have walked in and continue to walk in are my journey of spirit. My walk has shaped me, and I've learned through my walk that I and others who have walked in these shoes, these African American shoes, are unique leaders and artists and activists and advocates for a better world. We matter. We matter not as unique specimens for exploitation and inhumane scientific studies. We matter not as prized possessions to be branded, humiliated, and whipped as captured runaway property. We matter as individualized expressions of the divine, period. The wounds of racism have not been healed by constitutional amendments, legislation, protests, change in policies, but all of these actions have been important and continue to be important in order for this to be a more perfect union. But the wounds of racism exist still. Yet I am still full of faith and hope. As I watched Vice President-elect Harris on November 7th, I was proud. I was inspired, and my vision for my granddaughter expanded. Yes, my walk as an African American has been challenging, yet strengthening. It has been burdensome, yet hopeful. And so, as Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, I love to say that, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris reflected in her speech on the strength of the vision of Black women to see what can be unburdened by what has been, I felt, an unburdening. And I cried. But this time, I was shedding tears of joy. I firmly believe that when we put ourselves in another's shoes, that we can begin to heal ourselves, our relationships, and then we can begin to heal our nation. Now let us take these words into meditation.
Before we do, Jackie, I just wanted to affirm you and your journey, and to thank you personally for sharing that with me. I learned things about you that I haven't known over the decade that we've been friends.
Couldn't tell you everything.
But you did just now continue to reveal and provide an opportunity for all of us here to heal. This year, as you know, has been extraordinary in so many different ways. But one of them is we started this year here at Unity San Francisco in February with our tribute to Black History Month, and we had different Unity ministers, our New Thought ministers from the Spectrum Black, who gave little clips we had on video. And my commitment after listening to you and to this talk is that we get it out of 1 month. And that this technology, right? And that this technology that we can have you in San Diego and us here and speak to the whole world, that this is a gift of the coronavirus and this time. And that every month we're going to do something like this to bring out the history of repression and the presence of racism in our lives today so that we can once and for all shift this. Jackie and I are working together in Unity World Headquarters to make sure that all the vestiges of racism and all the places, the dark spots that it hides, are cleansed, and we let in the light. So I wanted to make that acknowledgement to you publicly and to here to our community, and to thank you for your courage, your tenacity, and your grace. You are an inspiration.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you, sister. Let's take this to our time of meditation. I'm going to ask Misa to start the music, and Misa has a special rendition of My Country 'Tis of Thee for us.